Good morning, everyone. This is our DAT weekly market update. This is our update for September, is it 5th, 2023?
Yep.
I'm Ken Animo, Chief of Analytics over here at DAT, joined by Dean Croak, who's our Principal Industry Analyst, and a very special guest, friend of DAT, friend of the show, Shannon Breen over at Freight Vana. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning, guys.
Yep.
It's awful early for you out there in Phoenix, Shannon.
Yeah, coming off a 3-day weekend, I really appreciate the start time, guys. This is amazing.
I'm not cutting in any golf, am I?
No golf. I got home late last night with my little guy from the West Coast. So
nice. Yeah, I'm dealing with the most statistically probable thing to ever happen. At least one of the kids getting sick after the first week of school. So he's upstairs with his bucket tucked on the chair, and I'm in the Adamo bunker today in the basement.
Stay out of the fray.
That's right. So Shannon, do you want to tell folks who might not be familiar with you or Freight Vana what you're up to and what you've been doing the past couple of years?
Yeah, definitely, guys. Appreciate you guys having me. Started Freight Vana about 2 years ago. We're about 26 months into our adventure here. I resigned from my corporate job in January of 21, just with a really different dream of starting a logistics company, an operating company, a little bit different, I'd say, from the traditional infrastructures that you see kind of propagate the marketplace, right, Ken? So we're heavily relying on trailers. So we have a large and growing trailer pool through a partnership with a large manufacturer. We've got almost 700 trailers nationally. And as you know, we'll talk a little bit about markets and market timing. It's interesting as we started this logistics company in the face of a very challenging kind of 2-year market. I always get the question like, oh, well, when's the right time to start? And so we really just built this operation brick by brick, seed round funding only, self-sustained. Kind of we talk about here, Ken, building our logistics company kind of like climbing Everest, right? You got to earn you acclimate at every point, you earn every base camp, and we climb together. And we've done a really good job in the first 2 years. So third-party logistics, trailers, we operate coast to coast. We've got trailers all the way in the West Coast and all the way in the upper Northeast, continue to expand that network and have really good shipper and carrier partners that we're working with to kind of unlock those benefits nationwide. So it's been an exciting 2-year run, challenging, but really fulfilling. And we're excited about kind of the next stages for our company.
That's awesome. I see you have Samantha Jones joining the fray over there. That'll be awesome.
Yeah, she came on. I got a chance to. I actually have never met Samantha until about 6 weeks ago. But the power of networks, I would tell you that a friend of a friend reached out and said, "Hey, Samantha wants to meet you guys." We talked to her. I mean, ton of ambition there. You all know her well. Loves the freight market. I'm going to really date myself and sound like the old guy here, Dean, if that's okay. But you know, I go back and I say, man, for that ambition, that level of expertise and passion at you know, in the mid-20s, I admire it, right? I didn't start in this industry until my early 30s, and I've been doing this for 12, 13 years now. When I see what she's doing, what she's capable of doing, I want to be there to support her. She loves our team, she loves our model, and we're excited to have her on board for sure.
That's awesome. All right, so we're going to bring Shannon back at the end, well, after we get through our market update, I should say, and talk about some trailers. But to get to that point, I got to run through some market update stuff, and so does Dean. So we'll see you in a minute, Shannon.
Cool, guys.
All right, key trends we're watching. End of the month, shipping boosts volume and line haul spot rates. I would say boost is a true way to describe it, but I would say that it's not a huge amount of lift, which I'm sure Dean will go into more detail here, but it's kind of concerning the lack of upward mobility we're seeing in rates. Hurricane Idalia wiped out 50% of the pecan crop in Florida, but vegetable growers were spared damage as the November harvest planting is still 2 weeks away. The July American Trucking Association truck tonnage was down just under a percentage point and up 3.2% year over year. And then the August Institute for Supply Chain Management PMI up slightly, indicating a slower rate of contraction, but still in contraction territory for the 10th straight month. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dean for our market update. Dean?
Yeah, thanks, Ken. I played with the wording of that first bullet point. I was going to say boosted rates to 2019 levels, which is pretty much where they are. So let's start with our load to truck ratio. Spot market load posts obviously boosted by the last shipping week of the month. Labor Day, of course, increases demand volumes up 2%, but still about 30% lower than this time last year in the spot market. Load to truck ratio in dry van up slightly to 3.02. In the refrigerated category, of course, Labor Day is all about beaches, barbecues, and ball games. There's 1,000-packed college stadiums over the weekend. Turns out that about 150 million of us were cooking on the weekend. It also brings to an end hot dog season. We consume something like 7 billion hot dogs, which is sort of some useless trivia, but it does help our refrigerated volumes this time of the year. Net increase of more load posts in the reefer section, load truck ratio up to 4.52. And in flatbed, spot market volumes are still around a half of what they were a year ago and almost a half of what they were in 2019. Load to truck ratio down to 6.51. It's about half what it was in 2019 for flatbed. Having a look at some of our markets around the country, we'll start with some of our hurricane updates. Idalia last week, the first significant storm to make landfall, had much less of an impact on freight markets than we expected. Carriers were kept out of the southeast region very briefly. Capacity tightened. Dry van rates across the region only increased a cent per mile last week. When I say region, that's Florida, southern Georgia, and the Carolinas. Average about $1.57. They'd been dropping for the prior 3 weeks, though, so capacity did tighten. Outbound rates in Atlanta up a penny per mile to $1.56. That's a massive distribution market, moving volume to the storm-affected region. So still capacity there to move a lot of that higher volume. Atlanta to Lakeland, one of the busier lanes for dry van carriers, was paying $2.71 a mile. Remember, these are line haul rates excluding fuel. That's about 20 cents a mile higher than the average for August. And in the Midwest, in Chicago and Joliet, line haul rates are up for the third week, following last week's 6 cents per mile increase to $2.04. Having a look at the refrigerated market, specifically the impact of Hurricane Idalia, outbound spot rates increased in the region about 6 cents per mile. The average was $1.94 after being flat for the prior 2 weeks. Inbound rates into the region were up 12 cents a mile to $2.62 in comparison. Jacksonville market reported solid gains, paying carriers an average of $2.56. Excluding fuel, and slightly higher in Savannah at $2.59 for outbound loads. Capacity still tight in Michigan. Outbound reefer rates continue to climb, averaging $2.79 following last week's 12 cent per mile increase. And across Lake Michigan and Wisconsin, reefer rates continue to climb, up 10 cents a mile last week to $2.76. That's up 34 cents a mile since the July 4 break. And in the Pacific Northwest, rates are increasing for reefer carriers, up 15 cents a mile on top of last month's average, currently averaging about $1.91. In flatbed, capacity was noticeably tight in Jacksonville also last week. Spot rates jumped 42 cents a mile to $2.72 for outbound loads following Hurricane Idalia's landfall. In the larger flatbed market in Lakeland, spot rates were up 4 cents a mile to $1.49. Having a look at Texas, after dropping for the prior 3 weeks, capacity did tighten last week. Rates averaged $2.07, up about 5 cents per mile last week. In Laredo, the largest border crossing market in the US, rates were up 5 cents a mile to $1.79 and up by about the same amount for inbound loads from Houston to Laredo, averaging $2.30. Capacity in the Pacific Northwest, very tight in Medford, as it typically is most of the year. Rates were up 18 cents a mile last week to an outbound average of $2.92. That's an increase of 31 cents a mile in the last 4 weeks. And wrapping up our market update with our year-over-year look at spot rates, capacity did tighten last week. Carriers continue to accelerate in August following the recent surge in diesel prices. So capacity is still gradually leaking out of the interstate long-haul sector. Spot rates followed a seasonal pattern, though, before Labor Day, increasing by about 3 cents a mile. That brought the national average to $1.62 last week. That was about 27 cents a mile lower than this time last year, but also identical to this time in 2019 for week 35. In the refrigerated category, yesterday, of course, ends a lot of the grilling season activity. Capacity tightened last week. Rates are up for the second week in a row, up 4 cents a mile. Line haul rates inch back over $2 a mile for the first time since mid-July, but remain about 24 cents a mile lower than last year. And in flatbed, lastly, after dropping 6 cents a mile in the last month, the national average flatbed spot rate reversed course last week, increasing by almost 3 cents a mile to a national average of $1.94. Last week's average was 28 cents a mile lower than this time last year and about 4 cents a mile higher than this time in 2019. So that's it for this week's market update. Remember, if you want to find out more about what's happening in freight and get a copy of some of the charts from today, the long form version of the weekly update will be published this evening at dat.com/market update. With that, it's over to Ken for the short term forecast.
Thank you, Dean. I appreciate it. We're going to walk through our short term forecast models this week. They go out 35 days from today. To give you some context, we go back in history a little bit. That's the blue line. It goes back to April 1st. It's a 7-day weighted moving average, excluding fuel. And then we've got 4 forecast models. So we've got Ratecast in green, a short-term model in red, which much more heavily weights near-term data. And then you've got gray and yellow, which are blends, kind of intermediate blends of the two. So what you're seeing here is a massive amount of model disagreement. You can see rates have boosted a little bit, as Dean mentioned, but we're kind of heading into that seasonal transition period post Labor Day when things should start to pick up as we start to kind of lock in on retail shipping peak. Ratecast is picking up on that. The short-term model, though, is not having it and pulling rates back down. When we go to reefer, it's actually really interesting. The models are pretty much in agreement, although for some reason Ratecast is stopping short by a few days there. But maybe it's getting nervous about heading into the end of the month and that Ohio State matchup with Notre Dame. Maybe that's it. But you can see here the models are pretty much in agreement about the kind of the volatility, but then also things as they head over the next 35 days. And then lastly, flatbed. I'd say this one is probably the most concerning. We have a ton of flatbed carriers and freight in our network. And I think this is probably the most concerning for that population of folks. Rates continue to slide downward. Ratecast does have it pulling out of that drop by the middle of the month, but the rest of the forecasts aren't so optimistic, and they have us down into the right pretty much through September. That's the short-term forecast. We're probably due for the long-term forecast here in the next week or two. I can get those ran and updated. It's usually a good level set as we head into the fall flurry of activity that we typically experience. So I'll make a mental note of that, and Dean, I'm sure, will remind me to update those. So with that, we'll bring Shannon back and get to our question of the week.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. So Shannon, power only is being discussed a lot from an industry solution engineering perspective, but how does it work or not in its current form?
Yeah, love the question. I think when you think about transportation, especially for the small to medium-sized carrier group, Dean, Ken, it's an access and costing issue, right? Traditionally, the retailers, CPG companies, manufacturers that need trailer pools, well, they kind of migrate to the large carriers naturally because they have the equipment necessary, especially in the dry van space. We won't see as much trailer pooling, as you guys both know, in regards to the reefer markets that you talked about there, Dean. But in the dry van space, right, trailer pools matter. So really what this option of building a trailer pool does is it unlocks the capacity of the small to medium-sized carriers, a lot of people that support DAT and follow a lot of your analytics. So it gives them access to that. We're able to create the trailer pools needed to satisfy those types of opportunities with the shippers. And then on the costing side, you think about it, it reduces the small to medium-sized carriers' need to maintain and manage and own that equipment. So on both sides, we're giving the access and we're reducing costs. So in that way, it works. I think we've all understand quite well, especially this group, the overall freight markets for the last 18 months and where they're riding compared to maybe 5-year historical average. So very challenging to add a pretty large cost line item to our P&L and what we do as far as building our company in the face of a market that's declining. But I've long said, and our shippers believe, and our partner carriers believe that what we're building here, as I mentioned in the earlier, is more of a climb, right? And so we all know that markets change, markets will inflect. I think we're appropriately calling the next cycle 6, right? And there's probably more cycles before that, so that may be unfair. But really, since the trend lines, if you look at the different peaks, what we're heading into at some point, undoubtedly there will be a cycle 6. But what we're trying to deliver through the power only, Dean, consistent, reliable freight, reduced costs, and giving those carriers the ability to work for some of the largest companies in America. And then behind the scenes, we're doing a lot of work on our side for optimization, for safety, to make sure that the equipment is where it needs to be, pool management, pool balancing, all this stuff that goes into our business sounds much different than your traditional broker of old, Dean and Ken. So it's heavy operations, heavy asset management, let's say with the agility of a traditional broker. So that's kind of our mix, what we're trying to build. And as we build it nationwide, and you know this to be true, we'll get the economies of scale and the balancing, and density does matter. So we're at a really cool point in our evolution, but a lot more so that we can deliver that value that I talked about to not only the industry, but to the small carriers and shippers that we service. So.
And I remember it was probably 6 to 9 months ago at this point. I think it was, I don't know. The weather was just starting to break, and I'm driving down 76 with my wife and kids in the car, and I almost wrecked the vehicle. My wife's like, "What are you doing?" Because I saw a Freightvana trailer. I wanted to text it to Everhart. I'm like trying to get out the window and take a picture of it. Dean knows this is a bad habit of mine because I did the same thing with Yellow when I was in Denver, as they were shutting down. I need to watch that. I was at least in an Uber then.
Ken, you know what's so cool about that story? I got one last night. I'm at the ball game in San Diego with my father and my son and my sister, and I get a text from an industry friend heading down a freeway in Missouri. It takes a picture, and I think hopefully, like for us, like we could always say trucks and trailers are table stakes in the industry, but the way we've built this, the way we've, I think, supported the industry, the carrier community want to do something different. Like people really take to that, right? So when people see that, they'll like the happiest thing in my day. I'm sitting there, it's like the 5th inning at this baseball game, and I get a text like, "Oh," and it's like the sunset, and it's like, how cool is that? That just like what would be typically considered commoditized is just a trailer, but for us, it's something different, right? It obviously is super passionate and personal to us, but even industry friends like you see it and they'll snap a picture, and I just think that's really cool about what we're building here. That's different when people are supporting you and believing in like this vision and dream that we're doing here at Freightvana.
Yeah, I can remember, we used to offer FedEx driver, I'm sure they still do, an incentive to put the logo on their truck because they didn't have to, right? On the trailer, I mean. And, everyone who's works in an operation knows there's like feast and famine, right? Especially trucking. And I remember every time the market dipped, you'd have the conversation of, well, should we really be paying these incentives? And FedEx kept wanting to change the color of the X, if you remember from, the different, now they're all the same color. Mm-hmm. And it always came down to like, when you ran any kind of survey, it's like, how do you know a brand? It's like, buy the trailer. Like
it is
Schneider's, Night Swifts, you just recognize them going down the road. Werner's, you still see a lot of the pale sun faded blue Werner trailers, going down the road.
Yeah. And that's honestly, we want to build something comparable, right? That can compete with those folks, not necessarily on the asset side, but when you think about that asset light network that we're building with trailers is the true unlock. And for those small carriers, it's pretty magical when you start to create those partnerships, give them consistent lanes. I mean, a lot of people don't realize about our business, and you guys do committed spot. Like, how do you work? Very untraditionally broker. We're probably about 85% committed. So what does that do? Now you talk about consistent lanes, consistent runs. And so you're building networks that when these carriers are running with us, they can get really comfortable with. And I think over time that helps kind of change the, let's call it the opportunistic nature of some of the marketplace when people really value those relationships and that consistency that you can build them.
Shannon, in a prior job, I worked with a large shipper that had about 5,000, give or take 100 trailers in a trailer pool. And a lot of the large national carriers were providing the power-only services, more dedicated sort of outsourced capacity. The problem they had was the trailer turns per week were just under 1, which on 5,000 trailers is not all that high utilization level, especially when you're talking about $70,000 trailer with lift gates. So and of course their goal that year was to get it to like 1.03, which would have represented like a $5 million saving in capex.
Right.
So how do you manage trailer turns? Because the problem with this fleet and a lot of other trailer pool fleets is it's not the volume of freight, it's the fact that trailers get stacked down the back and never get used because it's the one at the front that always gets used first. Or if you let drivers pick the trailers, they'll always be the ones with the shiniest wheels. So how do you manage the pool utilization levels?
Yeah. So pool utilization is actually easier than the turns, to your point, Dean, because the turns require volumes. But when you imagine starting out 2 years ago, no TMS, no revenue, no shipper contracts, right? We started taking trailers on 20 months. What you're illuminating, Dean, is the biggest problem, right? So when I have people call me all the time in the industry, like, "Oh, we want to get trailers too. Now, you're right, Dean. The turns, the efficiencies, the pool management is key. Pool management, we actually find to be, I'm not going to use the term easy because then I'd be lying to you. Easier than solving the dynamics of the freight movements and getting that turn times up. Naturally, as you build more density, now you have available pockets to sell into. So as we've grown our customer book and our carrier book, early stage, you're kind of taking whatever opportunities you come your way, especially as the market's dipping, right, guys? You can't walk in, hey, I'm brand new. We're Freightvana, so here's like the lanes we want to run. Like that conversation never happens at America's Biggest Shippers, right? So you've got to earn your respect. You've got to build your operation on the backs of probably sub-optimized freight, Dean. That's kind of your rookie kind of stage with your different shippers you're working with. But then what's really cool about your sophomore and your junior season, which we're starting to have with a few folks, Shannon, where can we help you? We do have this lane. You've done a good job. What if I can give you 5 in this? And then we show up, Ken, you referenced Don and team, heavy analytics here, heavy technology based. We can show up and really have distinct, specific conversations from a sales organization like, Ken, here's what I can do. Here's why it's super efficient. Here's our version of deadhead, right, Dean? Empty trailers hauling without revenue. And now we're able to, in this sophomore junior season, sell into that to start improving those numbers. But yeah, I mean, you talk about it. The game is all about the terms and the efficiency to sweat those assets appropriately. We are not there yet. I think you've seen that from us and hopefully myself. Like we're really authentic about the challenges ahead. But I would tell you every single month we're making progress. And the coolest part is now we have shippers that are like, during conversations and renewals and mini bids, Shannon, if there's something that sticks out, I want to know about it. Tell me about it. And we're able to have those conversations with Lars and Cassie, now Samantha and our biz dev team, really being strategic with our shippers saying, hey, here's the next evolution for help filling that network up.
So follow-up question to that is, we've been looking at a lot of the indicators of, fraud in freight networks. And one of those is inspections or lack thereof. And one of the problems trailer pools have always had is, of course, a trailer that sits degrades quickly. You've got an ABS light out, you've got a flat tire. So in states where they need a probable cause to pull you in for an inspection, trailer pool fleets are an easy mark.
Yeah.
How do you manage the maintenance aspect of trailers that don't move all the time?
Yeah, so that goes back to the operation aspect of what we do here, Dean. So we've got an entire team led by Hunter Robertson, our director, Jenny Hunter, heavy asset experience, got a whole team behind them. So they manage our inspections, our inspection timelines. We've got a proprietary inspection app that we've built to make sure we're doing those checks pre and post trip on drops. We've got, you mentioned security and fraud, huge issue right now, right? And I think we've all seen in the industry, the traditional model is, hey, we're going to track the driver's cell phone. Well, we're able to offer a different type of service because we look at it like a waterfall. Yeah, I've got traditional calls. We've got the driver's cell phone. I've got all the analytics. I've got 15-minute updates from that trailer, and I've got cargo sensors. So when you think about white glove service, when you think about security, geofencing, not only are we able to handle this stuff on the inspections, make sure the trailer's good, but then when our shippers load that product in, we can give a different feel and experience for chain of command, security alerting. We know when something goes outside of a zone or is being unloaded in a non-approved spot. Like we provide some value, once again, because of the heavy investment in trailers that honestly a traditional broker just can't do because they don't have the visibility and the analytics that I know you and Ken and team can appreciate.
Yeah, you've got to go deep with this analytics and the technology on trailer pools because they can be a black hole when it comes to data and equipment utilization levels.
I know one of the largest LTL carriers in America still uses a shared Google spread or shared Excel spreadsheet to track all their trailers.
Yeah, no, it's wild. Hey, Ken, I worked, you know my history, but
yeah, the
problem is you get fleets so size. You get older units, you get multiple acquisitions, you get different vendors, and the soup of all of that is exactly what you said, Ken. You've got these very archaic solutions, and then so what ends up happening is you can talk about real time, you can talk about delivering something, but on any given day, if 1 out of every 4 of those units nationally isn't working, you're dead in the water. Like that's a 26% failure rate, no chance, right? And we are lucky to have a 99% success uptime rate. Newer equipment, newer technology built on a different technology stack. It sets us apart. And then when shippers give us those opportunities, Dean, we we don't mess up. So
Yeah.
How are you repositioning most of them? Are you using the rail? Or are you doing paid repos? How are you?
paid repos. We don't do any rail. We did a couple of rail, but rail wasn't a great option for us. We do typically paid repos. We'll give carriers some free time, Ken. You got to give some flexibility in that for the small carriers. They may have the network fit, so we allow our trailers to be used on other people's product, and so we'll give that grace. And then we because of that dedicated network, Ken, right? Because I told you we're running ad hoc. If I was 80-20, I'd be dead in the water, right? A lot of people are like, oh, Shannon, I could put your trailers and go all over the country. I'm like, hey, that sounds like a really cool solution for you. And then to Dean's point, what on earth do I do next, right? And that doesn't work. So the heavy dedicated nature of what we're doing, Ken, to answer your question, plus some flexibility with our carriers allows us to build our network, add that optimization, as much as we can while we're building it up. So.
Awesome.
Do you find, driver behavior question, do you find your trailer brakes wear out at a faster rate, the power only versus...
Haven't seen braking issues, but you do got to be kind of aware of like the nits and gnats. It's like a rental car, right? Like, I mean, you've got to kind of have the good check-in, check-out process, Dean, because I have 3 children over the age of 18. And I always say like, hey, do you think they tell you about when they backed into that pole or scratched that paint? Like, when they come home, that's the first thing they do. Like, we'd all like to say yes, but the answer is you got to kind of have some mechanisms to make sure you check in, check out on that equipment. So I'd say tires is a big one. Naturally, that's going to be one of your biggest costs as you start replacing them. So we're working on some really cool technology there because we're getting all of the analytics from our satellites and we know how many miles. And so we're able to do some specific checks. And that also helps us with the inspections and making sure we avoid that. So luckily for us, we got a really good partner in Wabash too, guys. So you got to realize when we started this company, like we're running brand new manufactured Wabash trailers, high quality equipment. Our shippers love it. Our carriers certainly love it. Haven't had, they're not older units, Dean. So we don't have repairs and maintenance is not big. We spend the premium on the trailer, but we avoid some of the repair and maintenance costs that you'd see on a little bit older fleet.
Yeah, that's good practice. Yeah.
I have anything else on trailers? I have a broader question for Shannon before we wrap up. Dean, anything else?
No, that's it.
So Shannon, we'll get to shout outs in a second. I'm just curious. Anytime we have an industry vet on the show, I like to pick their brain. When do you see us digging out of the hole that we're in at the moment? I mean, this is, the recent bump in fuel prices has certainly taken its toll on the small carrier at a time when they really didn't need that headwind. What do you think, what are your outlook for peak this year and then kind of H1 next year?
Yeah, I think I'm in the large majority of the muted peak. There's plenty of still peak. The retail season that you mentioned in your earlier piece, Ken, that's still going to happen, right? I mean, consumer buying does scale up. So we're going to see it. It'll be a muted peak. It'll still have peak trends. But you and I both know, and especially my 12 years in this industry, the first quarter, only one first quarter has gone opposite of kind of market trends in the last 12 years. And that had to do with, some very rare scenarios in the overall marketplace. So I think we're not there first quarter. I think I'm looking probably April, May, June of next year, the middle. You're going to get through the next bid season, having conversations with shippers now. They'd like to, they're socializing. Hey, we'd like to stay flat, right? Naturally on rates between, let's call it March, April of 24 to March, April of 25. Now they say that saying, hey, we'd like to stay flat after, kind of the last 2 years, almost, 19, 20 months of the cost going down. So I can understand their desire to do that. That's where they're getting some pressure. But I do feel like we're far below, coming off the bottom. And I feel like March, April, May, you'll start to see some bids and awards start to highlight some of the pain we're seeing in the small carrier marketplace and capacity in general. I don't know how to take into calculus the election year because everybody always throws, it's an election year. I still really think it hinges heavily on consumer spending as it always does. And then, even some other industry vets have talked heavily about until the routing guides erode, right? If routing guides are running at 98, 99%, then there's no change, right? And I love that call out by some folks there. I think that's a really good key thing to watch in regards to the changing market. Because until you start to see that pain on the primary tender acceptance, right now shippers are still well north of 98, almost all of them that we work with. And so we're still monitoring that pretty closely. But I think March, April, to answer your question, the next bid season, and you'll probably see, single digit rate increases to accommodate shippers selling off of the spot freight that's out there. So many shippers right now are putting consistent freight on the spot market, but I am starting to have conversations with shippers like, hey, we don't want to be, caught on that. So we're going to start trying to figure out how to put those on committed freight. And I think that'll help kind of buoy the bottom market that we're seeing.
Right.
It's a pretty good take.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Dean, you want to take us to some plugs?
Yeah. A couple of updates for this week. As always, Sales Chatter is on tomorrow with Dan Deegan, 11 a.m. Eastern. It's Day-to-Day Wednesday. Robert Rouse is on Landline Now, Sirius XM Channel 146 Road Dog Radio, 7 p.m. Of course, DATCon, October 10 to 12 at the Western Galleria in Houston, Texas. Next week, our guests, plural, we have Jason Miller and Terry Esper. They'll be on the show next week talking college football. And that's about it, Ken. Back to you to wrap up the show.
Shannon, how can folks get in touch with Freightvana?
Freightvana.io. Follow us on LinkedIn. We have a huge presence there. We do a lot of our commentary on trailers and fun and social. So LinkedIn, Freightvana, or DM me directly on LinkedIn. I'd love to meet anybody interested in learning more about us, bud.
All right. We appreciate you getting up early and meeting with us, Shannon. The only plug for me is to reiterate what Dean said. October 10th through 12th in Houston, Texas. It's supposed to be balmy, but it'll be an awesome time at DATCon. If you use code GOBUCKS, all capitals, GOBUCKS, you'll get 25% off the price of admission. It's going to be a great conference. We have a ton of speakers, education sessions, typically a pretty great party as well. So it should be a good time, and I highly recommend signing up. So with that, we're going to sign off for this week. We'll be back next week with our Buckeye Roundtable, such as it were, with two decorated Ohio State alums, and we'll see you then. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Through the course of these next 2 days, there's no better chance for us to get your input and answer your questions in one really great collaborative event.
We have so much innovation going on and so much investment, so I can't wait to share this. This is exciting. We're using AI and machine learning and intelligence so you get action right away.
It's about bringing together all aspects of the network to solve your problems.
And we know that you all move faster if you provide that connected experiences for you.
We are trying to make it easier for you to use our products. It's going to continue in 23, and this is a testament to that. With 2 million trucks in our app, all of the stuff in the network, all of the knowledge in this room, we can legitimately change this industry.